So the campfire chat just ended, and I have a summary for you all to walk you through everything that was important in this campfire chat. Now, first thing, new patch notes will be releasing August 2nd on Wednesday next week, and August 8th is when the patch will be live. So roughly about a week and a half, 2 weeks ish. And they're going to be going through sorcerer survivability, versatility buffs, the barbarian early game, fury generation, late game unique buffs. All builds are attempted to be looked at, and they want to bring most of them up to parity to some of the top tier ones, along with some more unique buffs. They're going to be doing some skill upgrades slash aspect, basically buff slash changes in order to make them more viable. For example, greater chain lightning, which we'll see here later on. And they also want to bring up other stats too, vulnerable and crit, specifically like dot and overpower builds. Flat damage aspects and options that kind of scale are absolutely terrible. They want to make those better. And they also want to buff ultimates to kind of make them a viable option, not just for buffing your character, but for actual utility towards like damage, I guess, like actually using it for damage. So that's kind of the philosophy, and we'll dive more into it later on in this video. But actually, you can see here as we skip through, and I'll go ahead and remove this summary here, we can actually walk through all the different buffs that they're proposing. Now, one thing to say about this is that these are not finalized, so I'm only going to briefly go through them and kind of offer some of my thoughts on them because, well, they could change quite a few of these or deem them too strong or not strong enough, etc. So first off, for the Sorcerer and Barb, they're going to be the biggest ones that are going to be touched on because they are deemed as the weakest right now. For Sorcerer here, Firebolt changes. This is actually a pretty big one for any burning option because you're just going to generate mana when hitting, which is really, really nice. Fireball buffs. This is probably not good enough, but it's going to increase its radius as well as increase its critical strike damage for Destructive Fireball, which is pretty nice. Chain Lightning buffs actually seem to be pretty good, especially Greater Chain Lightning here. It's just going to work off of any bounce instead of specific bounces. By the way, they don't showcase the previous options, so I'll try to walk you through that one as we go through. But as we go further, the passive for Vir's Mastery's damage bonus is going to be increasing. Esu's Ferocity is also just going to be granted when hitting a boss with a critical strike. So just both bonuses can be granted, which is really, really nice. Burning effects deal increased damage plus increased damage per unique source of burning. So once again, a little bit of a buff here, mainly focused on burning aspects for the Sorcerer, which is kind of awkward because I don't think the cold options are like insanely broken in the game, but they are the best options for the Sorcerer. So legendary nodes, they're going to be just increasing your critical strike damage when casting Fireball or Meteor, which is actually a big critical strike increase. Increasing crackle energy damage. They're going to increasing damage reduction. Some of these are with like mana, specifically like the warding rare glyph. As you decrease in mana, you can increase your damage reduction. So actually this isn't super valuable because you usually have max mana, but some of the damage reductions can be a little bit better, as well as the Keeper of Flames node. And as we move forward, we have some things with some more rare nodes to increase their overall survivability. Mainly, they focused in on, as I mentioned earlier, late game survivability, as well as some of their build diversity and versatility. As we move forward, some of the legendary aspects have gotten adjusted, mainly focused in on the burning ones, specifically for Meteor and Fireball builds. One thing that I do want to mention is like the bonus burning damage, the increased critical strike damage on Meteor and Fireball. All of this is great, all of this is cool, all of this is necessary and should be in the game. I just don't think this is good enough overall to make these burning builds like top tier farming builds, because like the main problem with these builds is that oftentimes you kind of mix burning in with like your damage and you have to wait for them to burn down, or just their damage is so significantly lower that increasing their damage by 20, 40, 50% or whatever it is doesn't really do it. Like 50% increase on like 100 damage is still 150 versus like the 1k damage you're doing on ice shards is kind of my point here. So I'm not sure this is going to be enough for the Sorcerer. Once again, there's more aspects changes for all this stuff, different types of stuff. One thing that I will note is the Frozen Orbit aspect has been buffed by a good amount as well. And once again, the Chain Lightning aspects have been buffed for the mana generation and some of their bounces. This could be very, very interesting because, again, these builds are a little bit better than the Burning builds baseline. So I think those are interesting. Enough about the Sorcerer, though. Again, I'm just kind of going through and giving you guys all a quick look through these. If you want to check it out, I'll leave a link to this stream down below. We have the Barbarian. A lot of Fury generation has been increased on a lot of their basics, which is really, really nice. Damage for Rupture, damage for Double Swing has been buffed. Both builds, I think, are a little bit worse than the other options. And as we continue onwards, we have Upheaval. Lots of increasing in damage here, which is really, really nice. Bleed damage has been increased for Gushing Wounds. This is really, really nice, I'd say, because, well, this is actually a passive that can be really, really strong because it works with critical damage. So I think this buff is actually a really, really nice one. Bleed damage when overpowering. Overpower is kind of an awkward mechanic in the game. I'm not sure if this actually makes overpower a viable strategy, but we'll have to see. Berserking damage increasing, Walking Arsenal duration increasing. Walking Arsenal was kind of a little bit mediocre. Some of the aspects here are really, really nice. In particular, there was one in here that I noticed, maybe it was in another slide here, but Thorns for the Death Wish aspect has been increased, Ancestral Force has been increased. The Unrelenting Fury here. So what's interesting about this is when you hit a core skill and you kill it, you refund some of your Fury, but for this, it actually just refunds when hitting bosses. So actually the single target damage with this aspect has been significantly increased, which is really, really nice. Overall, just some more damage increasing and damage reduction increasing with the earthquakes. And as we move on, we have some of the uniques being buffed. In particular, I think that the Hellhammer was the one that they kind of focused on in particular. And they basically just buffed it quite significantly and also increased the duration and replaced some of their affixes with critical strike damage. This is something that they've been doing oftentimes, is replacing certain affixes with uniques with critical strike damage, because we know how important that is, and now it's actually pretty solid. Moving on, though, we have some buffs to the Rogue, I believe. Yeah, so to the Rogue is the next one up. They did significantly less buffs to the Rogue, Druid, and Necro, and I think that's kind of fair. I think the Rogue, Druid, and Necro are the top 3 classes comparatively in terms of farming, although I think some of the other builds can surpass these. I'd say most of these builds don't matter a whole lot. The Invigorating Strike actually could be useful. I'm interested in testing this out because the threshold is increased. Primary Forceful Arrow now pierces every 3rd cast. I'm not a huge fan of Forceful Arrow, so I don't think this changes too much. Caltrops, an enhanced Caltrop damage bonus increase. I actually really like this. I want to try out some Caltrops. The one I think is most important is the Poison Trap damage increasing, though. I use that oftentimes in basically every Trapper build. A couple other buffs for the passives here. One thing that I think we really should pay attention to is Siphoning Strike's lucky hit chance increased by, a flat 10%, which is actually a big deal. So this is actually a pretty big buff for basically every Rogue build. Damage reduction against damage over time effects increased. This can actually be quite useful in specific scenarios, but I don't think this is actually a good enough buff. And overall, just some kind of minor buffs overall. I think Victimize can actually be interesting, but with the way the Barber works, I don't know if that's ever going to be useful this season. Then we move on to the Druid. Once again, Druid's Spirit Gain has been increased across the board. Also, they wanted to focus in on Companion Druids, which I'll touch on later. So they buffed a lot to do with the Wolves and the Ravens. They also mentioned about Poison Druids and how they want to buff up that. And overall, they just increased the straight up damage from some of their legendaries, as well as their resource generation / resource gain, so which is really, really nice. Then we move on to the Necromancer, buffing up Bone Spirit here with the cooldown reduction. They buffed up the Sever aspects to not work with crits necessarily, so you can work without crits, which is really, really nice. And here's a crazy one. The aspect of exposed flesh, which is core to a lot of the bone builds out there, now just works with any build in the game. So this is partially one of the reasons why bone builds had such good resource generation at the end of the day, because of the lucky hit getting you extra resource. But now it works with any build, so that could be interesting for future Necro builds. And I believe they had a little bit more to add with some of their aspects here. Again, some aspect damage increasing and some essence regeneration with aspect of torment. There's some big buffs here. I don't know if it's still good enough to use, but like, for example, this was whenever you hit someone with a bone skill, you get some extra essence regeneration. It's literally more than 3x'd. The lowest amount for the new aspect is 3x the max amount, which is pretty crazy. So there's some more buffs here, along with some, just random things around the game. For example, monsters The following attacks now deal reduced damage to minions and companions. So that could be a really, really big buff to those builds, which is really, really nice. Some buffs to the Malignant Heart. The spell breaking one now just gives you damage reduction when you take elemental damage instead of damage reduction towards that specific element. Before it was basically useless. Now I could see it being really, really solid. Getting a 20% damage reduction could be very, very good in often scenarios. And Temerity, this is a big one. Temerity was, and still is, an excellent early to mid game option to really help your survivability, but they reduced a lot of the healing options now, so Temerity got worse because of that. However, now they're buffing it to make it work with all the maximum life and barrier. If it has a barrier right now, that actually works for condition checking, which is really, really nice. So that's pretty much all the buffs that we had. However, we still have some more things to go over here. As I mentioned, there was a lot of changes. They're going to be focusing in on Necro Minion buffs, Druid Companion buffs. They're going to be doing a big monster density buff. And let me see if I can find the image for you all, because they actually do a big change here. So right here, you could see the previous. This is what it is right now. And as we go forward, we'll see the updated version. So right there, that is going to be the updated monster density example. So you can see there's a huge monster density buff increase. I guess that's superfluous, but it's a huge density increase, okay? That is massive for the overall XP of the game and overall just enjoyment of the game. They're also going to be increasing boss monster HP, and they're going to be increasing the rewards that you acquire from that. So single turret damage is going to be even more valuable. Guaranteed legendary drop chance from like goblins after level 15. They're going to be adding that stashed tab. The respec costs are going to be reduced by 40%, which is huge. Increased elixir stacks. They're going to be reducing the dungeon leave cooldown or duration from 5 to 3 seconds. Again, I think it's hilarious that they just went back on it, but they mentioned that they didn't want it to be like breakable where you can abuse it to like not die or something like that. And they realized that it just wasn't fun, so they just listened to that feedback. Really promising, by the way. They're going to be removing trash Nightmare Dungeons affixes, Backstabber, Cold Enchanted, Resource Burn. These three are just immediately trashed for me. Specifically Backstabber, actually, more so than Resource Burn or Cold Enchanted. I just take way too much damage jumping into the fight, so I'm really happy about that. They also, in the future, this is not for the patch notes, in the future, they're going to be making changes to CC. They want to make resistances worthwhile, and they want to do some mount changes. They kind of alluded to like potentially removing barricades. I'm not 100% sure, but they alluded to it. So that's going to be that, guys. Tune in on August 2nd or August 8th to the channel. I'm going to have update videos for the full breakdown of the patch notes and, of course, showcase the patch notes inside the game. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. This was a pretty hefty one, and I'm pretty excited about it. But with that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.